My poor classmate couldn't afford lunch, so I shared mine, and we became friends. She moved away, but 15 years later, after my divorce with my cheating wife, a beautiful woman appeared behind me and said, "You know how some memories stick to your brain like gum on a hot sidewalk? Well, this one's been plastered there since I was 10 years old, and trust me, I've tried scraping it off more times than I can count. But here we are, 20-something years later, and I can still smell the cafeteria's mystery meat and hear the sound of plastic lunch trays clattering like some kind of elementary school percussion section from hell." It all started in 5th grade, which, let's be honest, is basically the minor leagues of childhood trauma. We'd just gotten shuffled into new classrooms for the year. You know how schools love to shake things up like a snow globe just to watch us all settle into new patterns of social awkwardness. Our new teacher was Ms. Dillard, and she was one of those educators who somehow managed to be both strict as a drill sergeant and young enough to still remember what it felt like to get picked last for dodgeball. She had this way of looking at you that made you wonder if she could see straight through to your soul, or at least to the fact that you hadn't done your math homework. The classroom smelled like disinfectant and broken dreams, with those fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like angry wasps trapped in rectangular prisons. You know the ones. They flicker just enough to make you question your sanity, but not enough to actually get replaced. The desks were arranged in those neat little rows that teachers love because it makes them feel like they're running a tiny military operation, complete with assigned seating that somehow always managed to put the weird kid next to the popular kid, creating more social tension than a reality TV show. I was sitting in my designated spot, probably daydreaming about literally anything other than whatever Ms. Dillard was teaching us. Multiplication tables, maybe, or the thrilling world of proper noun capitalization. You know how it is when you're 10. Your attention span is shorter than a goldfish's memory, and everything outside the classroom window looks infinitely more interesting than whatever's happening inside. That's when I noticed her. Maribel. She was sitting right next to me, which should have been prime real estate for passing notes or making faces at each other, but she was quiet as a church mouse on Sunday morning. Not the kind of quiet that screams, "I'm plotting something devious," but the kind that whispers, "I'm trying really hard not to be noticed." Her clothes looked like they'd seen more days than a well-loved teddy bear, and her shoes were doing that thing where they're trying their best to hold together, but you can tell they're fighting a losing battle against time and probably too many puddles. When lunchtime rolled around, and let me tell you, lunchtime in elementary school is basically the Super Bowl of social interaction. Everyone started pulling out their lunch boxes and brown bags like they were unveiling treasure chests. You had your standard PB&J crowd, your fancy Lunchables kids, the elite, if you will, and your thermos of homemade soup contingent that made the rest of us question our life choices. That's when Ms. Dillard dropped the bomb that would stick with me forever. She looked directly at Maribel with the kind of cold stare that could freeze water in July and said, "Maribel, since your parents haven't paid your lunch fee, don't eat today." Just like that. No sugarcoating. No pulling her aside for a private conversation. No attempt to handle the situation with even a shred of human decency. Just a public announcement that basically translated to, "Hey everyone, this kid's family is broke, so let's all watch her sit here and be hungry while you enjoy your chicken nuggets." The cafeteria didn't go silent like in the movies. Kids kept chattering and laughing and being generally oblivious to the small tragedy unfolding right in front of them. But I heard it, clear as a bell, and I watched as Maribel just nodded like she was used to this kind of treatment. She didn't argue, didn't protest, didn't even look embarrassed. She just accepted it with the kind of resignation that no 10-year-old should ever have to master. Everyone else started digging into their lunches like nothing had happened, but I couldn't shake the image of Maribel just sitting there, watching everyone eat while her stomach probably felt like it was eating itself. I mean, what kind of messed up system punishes a kid for something that's completely out of their control? It's like blaming a fish for being wet or a politician for being disappointing. It just doesn't make sense. I looked down at my own lunch. Nothing fancy, just a sandwich my mom had thrown together that morning while half asleep and running late for work. But suddenly it felt like I was holding gold bullion instead of bologna and white bread. So I did what any decent human being would do. I tore off half my sandwich, wrapped it in a napkin like I was packaging precious cargo, and when nobody was looking, I slipped it into Maribel's hand under the desk. She looked at me with these wide eyes that seemed way too old for her face, like she'd seen more of the world's ugliness than any kid should have to. "Thank you, Riley," she whispered, and her voice was so quiet I almost missed it over the cafeteria chaos. But I heard it, and something about the way she said my name. Like she was surprised that someone had actually noticed her, actually cared enough to share, hit me right in the chest like a dodgeball to the feelings. That moment, that simple exchange of half a sandwich and a quiet, "thank you," became the foundation of everything that would come after. It was like planting a seed in concrete. You wouldn't expect anything to grow, but sometimes life finds a way to surprise you. Sometimes kindness, even the smallest gesture, can change everything. And that's exactly what it did. Let me tell you something about my mom. She's got this superpower where she can smell injustice from 3 counties away, and when she catches a whiff, she turns into this unstoppable force of maternal righteousness that would make superheroes jealous. So when I walked through our front door that evening, still carrying the weight of watching Maribel sit there hungry, while everyone else chowed down like it was no big deal, I knew I had to spill the beans to the one person who'd actually do something about it. Our house wasn't much to write home about. A modest 2-bedroom that had seen better decades, with that lived-in look that screams, working-class family trying their best. The kitchen was the heart of our little operation, complete with linoleum flooring that had probably been trendy when disco was king, and appliances that were older than some of my teachers, but still chugged along like the little engines that could. Mom was standing at the stove, stirring something that smelled like heaven and looked like it could cure whatever was wrong with the world, which in our house usually meant her famous spaghetti sauce that she'd been perfecting since before I was born. "Hey, kiddo," she called over her shoulder without even turning around, because moms have this weird radar that tells them exactly when their offspring walk through the door. "How was school? And don't even think about saying fine, because I can tell by your face that something's eating at you, and it's not homework anxiety." I dropped my backpack by the door with that satisfying thud that signals the end of another day in the educational trenches and wandered into the kitchen where Mom was doing her thing. She had this way of multitasking that would put circus performers to shame, stirring sauce with one hand, checking on garlic bread with the other, and somehow still managing to give me her full attention like I was the most important thing in her universe. "There's this girl in my class," I started, and immediately saw Mom's antenna go up because she knew that tone. "Her name's Maribel, and today MS. Dillard told her she couldn't eat lunch because her parents haven't paid some fee or something." Mom stopped stirring. Just stopped. The wooden spoon hung suspended in the sauce like time had frozen, and she turned to look at me with that expression that meant someone was about to get a piece of her mind, and it probably wasn't going to be me. She told a child she couldn't eat? In front of the whole class. Yeah, just like that. Cold as ice cream in January. And Maribel just sat there while everyone else ate, like she was used to it or something. I could feel my voice getting a little shaky because even talking about it made my stomach twist up like a pretzel. Mom set down the spoon and crossed her arms, which in the universal language of mothers everywhere means someone's about to get schooled. "That's not right, Riley. That's not right at all. No child should go hungry, especially not as some kind of punishment for something their parents did or didn't do." I gave her half my sandwich, I said, and Mom's expression softened like butter left out in the sun. "Good," she said, and I could hear the pride in her voice. "That's exactly what you should have done. But half a sandwich isn't going to solve the problem, is it?" That's when Mom went into what I like to call logistics mode. That mental gear where she starts calculating solutions faster than a computer running math problems. She stood there for maybe 30 seconds, and I could practically see the wheels turning in her head as she worked through the possibilities. Then, like she'd just solved world hunger, she snapped her fingers and grinned. "I already cook lunch for your dad every day," she said, referring to Dad's brown bag lunch that she packed with the same care most people reserve for wrapping Christmas presents. "One more won't hurt. Heck, it won't even make a dent in the grocery budget." And just like that, the solution was born. No committee meetings, no bureaucratic red tape, no forms to fill out in triplicate. Just a mom who saw a problem and decided to fix it with the most powerful weapon in her arsenal. Homemade food made with love and a healthy dose of righteous anger at the system that would let a kid go hungry. The next morning, Mom was up even earlier than usual, which is saying something because she normally gets up at an hour that most people consider theoretical. I wandered into the kitchen still half asleep and found her packing not one, but two identical brown bags, each one loaded with enough food to feed a small army. We're talking sandwiches cut into perfect triangles, because everyone knows triangular sandwiches taste better, fruit that actually looked appetizing, homemade cookies that were still warm from the oven, and juice boxes that she'd probably gotten on sale, but somehow made feel special anyway. "One for you, one for Maribel," she said, handing me both bags like she was entrusting me with nuclear launch codes. "And Riley? Make sure she knows this isn't charity. This is what neighbors do for each other." When I handed Maribel that second lunch at school, her eyes went wide like she'd just witnessed a miracle, which I guess in her world, maybe she had. The brown bag was warm from whatever Mom had packed inside, and it was wrapped with the kind of care that only comes from someone who understands that food is love in its most basic form. That simple gesture opened the floodgates. We discovered we lived in the same direction and started walking home together, our conversations flowing like water, finding its natural course. She told me about her dad, who was unemployed and had developed what adults like to call a gambling problem, which is a fancy way of saying he liked to bet away money they didn't have on things that never paid off. Her mom worked late shifts at whatever job would have her, trying to keep food on the table and a roof over their heads, fighting a battle that seemed designed to be unwinnable. At school, we were both part of that invisible crowd, the kids who weren't popular enough to be cool, weren't weird enough to be outcasts, just sort of existing in that middle space where friendships form out of necessity and genuine connection. We became each other's lifeline in a sea of elementary school social politics that made no sense to anyone with half a brain. And it all started with Mom's simple philosophy: there's always room for one more at the table, especially when that one more really needs a place to belong. You know how some friendships develop slowly, like watching paint dry or waiting for your dial-up internet to load a single web page? Well, ours wasn't like that at all. After a few weeks of shared lunches and walking home together, it felt like Maribel and I had been friends forever, like we'd just been waiting for the universe to introduce us properly. So when I got this brilliant idea to invite her over to meet our cat, Milo, it seemed like the most natural thing in the world. Even though, looking back, I was probably more nervous than a long-tailed cat in a room full of rocking chairs. "Hey, want to come see my cat?" I asked one afternoon as we were walking our usual route home, kicking at loose gravel and debating whether the cafeteria's pizza actually qualified as food or if it was some kind of science experiment gone wrong. "He's pretty cool, I guess. For a cat." Maribel stopped walking and looked at me like I'd just offered her a winning lottery ticket. "You have a cat? Like a real one?" "Well, yeah," I said, suddenly realizing that maybe having a pet wasn't as universal as I'd thought. "Unless you count stuffed animals, but Milo's definitely real. He's got the attitude to prove it." The smile that spread across her face was like watching the sun come up after the world's longest night. "I'd love to meet him. Now, let me paint you a picture of Milo, because this cat was basically the feline equivalent of a grumpy old man who'd seen too much of the world and wasn't impressed by any of it. He was this orange tabby with white patches that looked like someone had spilled bleach on him in strategic places, and he had this permanent expression that suggested he was constantly judging everyone and finding them lacking. Mom had rescued him from the animal shelter when I was about 7, and he'd spent the last few years establishing himself as the true ruler of our household, with the rest of us serving as his personal staff. When we walked through the front door, Mom was in the kitchen as usual, but this time she was armed with fresh-baked chocolate chip cookies that made the whole house smell like a commercial for happiness. "Well, hello there," she said to Maribel with that warm smile that could melt an iceberg. "You must be the famous Maribel I've been hearing so much about." I watched Maribel's face carefully, half expecting her to be overwhelmed or uncomfortable, but instead she just lit up like a Christmas tree. "Thank you so much for the lunches, Mrs. Patterson." "You don't have to." "Nonsense," Mom interrupted, waving her hand like she was shooing away flies. "That's what neighbors do. Now, I hear you're here to meet our resident celebrity." As if he'd been waiting for his cue like some kind of furry actor, Milo appeared around the corner with that slow, deliberate walk that cats use when they want you to know they're doing you a favor by gracing you with their presence. He took one look at Maribel, and did something that absolutely shocked me to my core. He walked right up to her and started purring like a tiny motor. Now, you have to understand, Milo was not what you'd call a people cat. He tolerated me because I lived there and occasionally remembered to fill his food bowl, and he put up with Mom because she was the one with opposable thumbs who operated the can opener. But strangers? Forget about it. He usually treated visitors like they were carrying the plague and had personally offended his ancestors. But with Maribel, it was like he'd been waiting his whole life to meet her. She sat down on our old, beat-up couch, the one with cushions that had seen better decades and springs that creaked like a haunted house. And Milo jumped right into her lap like he'd been invited to a royal coronation. And then, miracle of miracles, Maribel started laughing. I'm not talking about a polite little chuckle or one of those fake laughs you do when adults tell jokes that aren't funny. This was real laughter, the kind that bubbles up from somewhere deep inside and spills out like water from a broken dam. It was the first time I'd ever heard her laugh, really laugh, and the sound was so pure and joyful that it made something in my chest feel warm and tight at the same time. He's so soft, she said, running her fingers through Milo's fur while he purred loud enough to wake the dead. And he's so orange, like a little tiger. Don't let it go to his head, I warned, sitting down next to her. He already thinks he's the king of the universe. From that day forward, Maribel started coming over almost every afternoon after school. It became our routine, as natural as breathing. We'd walk home together, dump our backpacks by the door, grab whatever snack Mom had waiting for us, and then settle in to do homework while Milo supervised from various strategic locations around the living room. Mom treated Maribel like she'd always been part of the family, which in Mom's world meant she got the full treatment. Questions about her day, gentle nagging about eating enough vegetables, and that special brand of maternal concern that somehow manages to be both protective and empowering at the same time. I watched Mom even call Maribel's mom one evening to check in and make sure it was okay for Maribel to be at our house so much, because that's just the kind of person Mom was. She wanted to make sure all the adults were on the same page when it came to taking care of kids. Our house became Maribel's safe haven, a place where she could just be a normal kid instead of worrying about whether there'd be food on the table or if her parents were fighting again. She'd sit on the floor with Milo sprawled across her legs, working on math problems while I wrestled with whatever book report was due the next week. And for those few hours every day, the world outside our front door couldn't touch her. But you know how life is. Just when you think you've got everything figured out, it throws you a curveball that knocks you flat on your back. And our curveball was coming whether we were ready for it or not. You know how they say time heals all wounds? Well, whoever came up with that brilliant piece of wisdom clearly never had to watch their best friend disappear from their life, like smoke in the wind. Because let me tell you, some wounds don't heal. They just learn to hide better, lurking under the surface like emotional landmines waiting for the perfect moment to blow up your day. But I'm getting ahead of myself here. Let me back up and tell you about the day everything went sideways, because that's how life works, isn't it? One minute you're cruising along thinking you've got everything figured out, and the next minute you're staring at a reality that makes about as much sense as pineapple on pizza. Which, for the record, is a crime against both pineapples and pizza. It happened on a Tuesday, because of course it did. Tuesdays are like the annoying little brother of weekdays, not quite as depressing as Monday, but still early enough in the week to crush your soul with maximum efficiency. Maribel had been quieter than usual for the past few days, which should have been my first clue that something was brewing in the background. But being a clueless 10-year-old, I just figured she was tired or maybe coming down with something. We were sitting on my front porch after school, watching Milo stalk a leaf that had the audacity to blow across his territory, when Maribel finally dropped the bomb that would change everything. Her voice was so quiet I almost missed it over the sound of our neighbor's lawnmower. "Riley," she said, and something about the way she said my name made my stomach drop like I'd just gone over the biggest hill on a roller coaster. "I have to tell you something." I looked at her and saw tears building up in her eyes like storm clouds gathering on the horizon. This wasn't going to be good news. You don't cry when you're about to tell someone you aced your spelling test or found $5 on the sidewalk. "My parents are getting divorced," she said, and the words hung in the air between us like a death sentence. "Mom says we're moving to New Mexico to live with my grandparents. She already found a job there." I'm pretty sure my brain short-circuited for a few seconds, because the next thing I knew, I was staring at her like she'd just told me aliens had landed in the school playground and wanted to discuss our math homework. When was all I managed to croak out. Next week. Next week. 7 days. 168 hours. Not nearly enough time to process the fact that my best friend, my only real friend, was about to vanish from my life like she'd never existed in the first place. But what about school? What about? I gestured helplessly at everything around us. Because how do you sum up a friendship in words? How do you explain that someone has become such an integral part of your daily existence that imagining life without them is like trying to picture the color blue without actually seeing it? I know, she whispered, and now the tears were falling for real, making tracks down her cheeks like tiny rivers of sadness. I don't want to go either. But Mom says we don't have a choice. Dad's gambling got worse, and now we might lose the house anyway, so? She didn't need to finish. I got it. Sometimes adults make decisions that don't make sense to kids, but we're stuck going along for the ride whether we like it or not. It's one of those harsh realities that nobody warns you about when you're growing up, that sometimes the people you love most have to leave, and there's absolutely nothing you can do to stop it. The next week flew by like someone had hit the fast-forward button on life. Every day felt precious and terrible at the same time, like we were trying to cram months of friendship into a few remaining afternoons. Mom was amazing, of course. She made sure Maribel's last few lunches were extra special, and she even drove us to the ice cream place downtown for what she called a proper goodbye Sunday, which was just an excuse to spoil us rotten while pretending she wasn't crying behind her sunglasses. On Maribel's last day, she gave me something that I still have to this day, a tiny notebook filled with doodles and drawings she'd made during our homework sessions. Little cats that looked like Milo, stick figures of us walking to school, flowers and hearts, and random geometric patterns that probably meant nothing to anyone else, but felt like treasure to me. "Don't forget me," she said as her mom loaded their car with boxes and suitcases and the remnants of a life that had to be packed up and moved across the country. "Are you kidding?" I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. Like I could forget you even if I wanted to. And then she was gone, leaving behind nothing but an empty desk at school and a Maribel-shaped hole in my daily routine that felt bigger than the Grand Canyon. For a while, we tried to stay in touch. Holiday cards, the occasional letter, a phone call here and there that felt awkward and stilted, because how do you maintain a friendship across 1,000 miles when you're 10 years old and don't have email or cell phones or any of the technology that makes long-distance relationships possible today? But life has a way of moving forward whether you're ready or not. I got older, made new friends, went to middle school and then high school, where I discovered that being shy and awkward was apparently my brand. I wasn't popular, but I wasn't a complete social disaster either. Just your average kid trying to figure out how to navigate the minefield of adolescence without exploding. College was better. State university, a degree in something practical that would pay the bills, and the gradual realization that I was becoming an actual adult with actual responsibilities, which was both terrifying and weirdly exciting. That's where I met Jasmine. Let me tell you something about rock bottom. It's not actually a place you fall to. It's more like a basement you didn't know existed until someone opens a trapdoor under your feet, and you find yourself tumbling into a whole new level of, well, this sucks. And that's exactly where I found myself on that fateful Monday morning when my coworker Brent decided to throw me under the bus so hard I practically left skid marks on the office carpet. Picture this. I'm sitting at my desk at Morrison Industrial Solutions, nursing my third cup of coffee and trying to pretend I understand why anyone would schedule a meeting at 7 a.m. Seriously, who hurt these people? When my boss, Mr. Garvey, comes storming out of his office like a tornado wearing a cheap suit. Now, Garvey's normally about as intimidating as an angry hamster, but when he's got that vein popping out on his forehead, you know someone's about to get professionally assassinated. "Patterson," he barked, and every head in the office turned to watch what was about to become either a public execution or the world's most uncomfortable performance review. My office. Now, I followed him into his glass-walled chamber of corporate doom, where he proceeded to inform me that I had somehow managed to miss the biggest sales meeting of the quarter, a meeting with Hartwell Manufacturing that could have landed us a contract worth more than my annual salary. Apparently, this meeting was so important that missing it was roughly equivalent to forgetting to show up for your own wedding. Except worse, because at least a wedding only disappoints your family and friends, not the entire company's quarterly projections. I don't understand, I said, genuinely confused because I'm many things, but irresponsible isn't one of them. I never got any notification about this meeting. When was it scheduled? That's when Garvey dropped the bomb that would haunt my nightmares for weeks. Brent sent out the meeting details last Friday. Said he coordinated with everyone on the team. Brent. Of course it was Brent. The same Brent who'd been gunning for the promotion I'd been working toward for 2 years. The same Brent who had the personality of wet cardboard, but somehow managed to schmooze his way into everyone's good graces. The same Brent who, I was now realizing, had probably forgotten to include me in that email on purpose. Fix this, Garvey said, pointing at me like I was a broken appliance that needed immediate repair. You've got 3 days to salvage this deal, or you're gone. And I mean gone, not transferred to the basement gone. So there I was, with 72 hours to perform a miracle that would make Moses jealous, trying to resurrect a business relationship that had been murdered by corporate politics and my own naive belief that people actually play fair in the professional world. It was like being asked to unscramble an egg while blindfolded and riding a unicycle. Theoretically possible, but requiring more luck than skill. That's how I found myself racing across town to Torwell Manufacturing, a company that had been dragging their feet on our proposal for months like they were getting paid by the hour to waste my time. Their office was one of those industrial complexes that looked like it had been designed by someone who thought aesthetic appeal was a form of communicable disease. All concrete and steel and windows that probably hadn't been cleaned since the Clinton administration. The receptionist, a woman who looked like she'd been personally insulted by my very existence, directed me to wait in a lobby that had all the charm of a dentist's office crossed with a bus station. I sat there for 20 minutes, watching the clock tick away precious seconds of my rapidly diminishing career while trying not to think about how I was going to explain to Mom that I'd managed to get myself fired through absolutely no fault of my own. Finally, Travis, their procurement manager, emerged from the depths of the building looking like a man who'd rather be literally anywhere else on earth. He was one of those guys who probably peaked in high school and had been coasting on that glory ever since, with the kind of handshake that suggested he was constantly trying to prove something to himself. "Look, Patterson," he said before I could even launch into my carefully prepared pitch. "We've been going back and forth on this for months. If you want this deal, we need a discount. Period. 20% off your quoted price, or we walk." 20%. He might as well have asked me to perform surgery with a butter knife while juggling flaming torches. Our margins were already tighter than skinny jeans on a linebacker, and cutting another 20% would basically mean we'd be paying them to take our equipment. "Travis, you know I can't authorize that kind of discount," I said, trying to keep the desperation out of my voice. "But maybe if I could speak to someone higher up the food chain, we could work something out? Just one dinner meeting? 30 minutes of FaceTime with whoever makes the real decisions around here." He sighed like I'd just asked him to donate a kidney. "Maybe, but my boss has been in a bad mood lately. Budget cuts, corporate pressure, you know how it is. Guy's been snapping at everyone who walks through his door." "I'll take my chances," I said, because at that point I was willing to tap dance naked in Times Square if it meant saving my job. "Fine," Travis said, checking his watch like every second spent helping me was a personal affront to his existence. "But don't say I didn't warn you. Mr. Coulter doesn't have much patience for sales pitches these days." 5 minutes later, the office door opened, and in walked Mr. Coulter, the VP who apparently held my professional fate in his hands. He was a tall, imposing guy with the kind of presence that suggested he'd been born wearing a business suit and had never experienced a moment of self-doubt in his entire life. He didn't even let me get through my opening line. "If you can't meet our price point, don't waste our time," he said with all the warmth of a frozen fish stick. "We've got 3 other vendors who are hungry enough to work with our budget." And just like that, I was staring down the barrel of unemployment, watching my career circle the drain like water in a bathtub. I was already mentally composing my resignation letter when a voice behind me stopped everything cold. "He'll listen to me." You know those moments in movies where time seems to slow down and everything gets all dramatic with the swelling orchestral music and close-ups of people's shocked faces? Well, real life doesn't come with a soundtrack, but I swear I could hear violins playing somewhere in the distance when that voice cut through the tension in Coulter's office like a hot knife through butter. I turned around so fast I probably gave myself whiplash, and there she was, a woman in heels that could probably be classified as weapons and a Navy business suit that screamed, "I'm successful and I know it." She walked into that room with the kind of confidence that makes you wonder if she was born knowing secrets the rest of us spend our whole lives trying to figure out. Her hair was darker than I remembered, styled in one of those professional cuts that probably cost more than my monthly car payment, and she carried herself like she owned not just the room, but the entire building and possibly the block it sat on. But it was her eyes that stopped me cold. Those same wide, expressive eyes that had looked at me with such gratitude over half a sandwich all those years ago. Eyes that had seen too much too young, but had somehow transformed that pain into strength instead of bitterness. "He'll listen to me," she repeated, and Coulter, the same guy who just dismissed me like I was a door-to-door salesman peddling encyclopedias, suddenly straightened up like someone had just plugged him into an electrical socket. "OMS. Vega," he stammered, and I swear I could see him mentally scrambling to switch gears from intimidating corporate overlord to respectful subordinate. It was like watching a transformer, except instead of turning into a car, he turned into a guy who clearly knew which side his bread was buttered on. She didn't even acknowledge his sudden change in demeanor. Instead, she walked over to his desk with those killer heels clicking against the floor like a countdown timer, picked up the proposal I'd been trying to pitch for the last 15 minutes, and started flipping through it with the kind of focus that made it clear she wasn't just skimming for the pretty pictures. "I've reviewed the specifications," she said after what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 30 seconds. Her voice was calm, professional, and carried just enough authority to make it clear that whatever she was about to say wasn't really a suggestion. "This machine is exactly what we need for the new production line. The price point is fair for the quality we're getting. Approve the deal." Coulter looked like he was caught between wanting to argue and knowing better than to question someone who clearly outranked him in the corporate food chain. You could practically see his internal calculator working overtime, weighing his ego against his job security. "If you say so, Ms. Vega," he finally said, which in corporate speak translates to, "Yes, ma'am. Whatever you want, please don't get me fired." I stood there like an idiot, probably with my mouth hanging open like a fish that had just been told it could fly, watching this mysterious woman single-handedly save my career with the kind of effortless authority that most people only dream about having. It was like watching a superhero in action, except instead of a cape, she wore designer clothing, and instead of fighting crime, she fought corporate bureaucracy. Then she turned to me, and that professional mask slipped just enough to reveal a smile that was both familiar and completely transformed by time and success. "Riley," she said, and hearing my name in her voice felt like finding a $20 bill in an old jacket pocket. Unexpected and strangely wonderful. "You don't remember me?" I blinked. Then I blinked again, because apparently my brain needed a moment to process what my eyes were telling me. The confident businesswoman, the commanding presence, the way she just casually dismantled Coulter's objections like she was swatting flies. It was all so different from the quiet, hungry girl I'd known in 5th grade that it took me a few seconds to connect the dots. But those eyes, those were the same eyes that had looked at me with such genuine gratitude when I'd shared my sandwich. The same eyes that had lit up when she first met Milo. The same eyes that had filled with tears when she told me she was moving away. "Wait." I started, and then stopped, because my brain was still trying to reconcile the woman standing in front of me with the girl in my memories. "Maribel." She laughed, and the sound was like finding a song you thought you'd forgotten, but had actually been humming under your breath for years. "Took you long enough. But you said your name was Ms. Vega," I said, still trying to piece together the puzzle. "Maribel Vega," she explained, and I could see the story in her eyes even before she said it. "I took my stepfather's name after Mom remarried. Figured it would be easier for business." That's when it all clicked into place like the last piece of a jigsaw puzzle sliding home. "You saw my name on the proposal," I said. "Riley Patterson isn't exactly a common name," she said with a grin that was equal parts mischief and nostalgia. "When I saw it come across my desk, I had to know if it was really you. Small world, huh? Small world? Try microscopic." Here I was, thinking my career was about to become ancient history, and the universe decides to play the ultimate wild card by dropping my childhood best friend into the middle of my professional crisis like some kind of guardian angel in a power suit. I can't believe it's really you, I said, and I probably sounded like a broken record, but my brain was still trying to process the fact that the little girl who used to sit in my living room sharing homework and cat cuddles had somehow transformed into this powerhouse who could make corporate executives jump through hoops with a few well-chosen words. Believe it, she said, and there was something in her voice, pride, maybe, or satisfaction, that told me the journey from there to here hadn't been easy, but it had definitely been worth it. You know how sometimes life throws you such a curveball that you need alcohol to process it properly? Well, that's exactly how Maribel and I ended up at Murphy's Tavern that evening, sitting across from each other in a booth that had probably witnessed more confessions than a Catholic church, trying to catch up on about 15 years of life, while pretending we weren't both still slightly stunned by the cosmic joke the universe had just played on us. Murphy's was one of those dive bars that doesn't try to be anything other than what it is, a place where working people go to decompress after getting their souls crushed by the corporate machine. The lighting was dim enough to hide the questionable stains on the upholstery. The jukebox was stuck somewhere between 1985 and 1995, and the bartender looked like he'd been there since the Carter administration. Perfect atmosphere for two old friends trying to figure out how the hell they'd ended up in the same room again after all these years. So, Maribel said, raising her glass of whiskey like she was making a toast to the absurdity of life, Director of Procurement at Torwell Manufacturing. Not exactly what I pictured myself doing when I was 10, but here we are. Better than what I pictured you doing, I said, clinking my beer bottle against her glass. I mean, you were always smart, but seeing you make Coulter roll over and play dead like a trained poodle, that was something else. She laughed, and it was weird how that sound could transport me right back to my mom's living room with Milo purring in the background. Yeah, well, turns out having to fight for everything from a young age gives you some useful skills in the business world. Who knew? We'd ordered tacos because apparently neither of us had eaten a real meal all day, too caught up in the chaos of work and life and the general insanity of being adults. The food was exactly what you'd expect from a dive bar. Not winning any culinary awards, but filling enough to soak up the alcohol and give our hands something to do while we navigated this emotional minefield. Okay, so catch me up, she said, stealing one of my jalapenos, because some things never change. Last I heard, you were heading off to college. What happened after that? And please tell. That's when I had to break the bad news about Milo, who'd lived a good long life, but had finally succumbed to old age about 3 years back. Watching Maribel's face fall was like watching someone tell a kid that Santa Claus was actually just their drunk uncle in a costume. Heartbreaking and unavoidable. He was 17, I said, trying to make it sound less devastating than it felt. Mom said he went peacefully in his sleep, probably dreaming about terrorizing the mailman one last time. I'm sorry, she said, and I could tell she meant it. He was a good cat. Grumpy, but good. After that, I found myself spilling everything. And I mean everything. The whole sorry saga of my marriage to Jasmine, a woman who'd seemed perfect on paper but turned out to have all the depth of a puddle in August. How we'd met in college, dated for 2 years, got married because it seemed like the logical next step, and then spent 4 years slowly realizing we had about as much in common as a fish and a bicycle. She was beautiful, I said, because honesty seemed like the theme of the evening. Smart, ambitious, knew how to work a room like a politician. But looking back, I think I was more in love with the idea of being in love than I was actually in love with her. What happened? Maribel asked, and there was something in her voice, not pity, exactly, but genuine concern mixed with the kind of careful curiosity you use when you're not sure if you're about to step on a landmine. Her personal trainer happened, I said, taking a long pull from my beer, because some truths go down easier with alcohol. Guy named Brad. Because of course his name was Brad. Apparently, I was too safe, and she needed passion. Found out about it when I came home early from a business trip and walked in on them doing yoga together. Naked yoga. In our bed. Maribel's eyes went wide, and then she started laughing. Not the mean kind of laughter that makes you feel worse, but the kind that acknowledges just how ridiculous life can be sometimes. Naked yoga? Seriously? That's like the most cliched affair scenario ever. Did she at least have the decency to look embarrassed? Nope, I said, and now I was laughing too, because distance and alcohol have a way of making even the worst experiences seem kind of absurd. She just looked at me like I was the one who'd done something wrong by coming home to my own house. Said she'd been meaning to talk to me about our relationship anyway. Classy, Maribel said, and the sarcasm in her voice could have cut glass. Real classy. The divorce was pretty straightforward, I continued, because apparently I was in full confession mode now. No kids, no major assets to fight over, just two people who'd figured out they didn't actually like each other very much. She kept the fancy espresso machine, I kept my dignity. Seemed like a fair trade. That's when I told her about work, about Brent's backstabbing move, and how close I'd come to losing everything before she'd swooped in like some kind of corporate superhero. I watched her face change as I described what had happened, saw something that looked suspiciously like righteous anger flash in her eyes. Wait, she said, setting down her whiskey with the kind of controlled precision that suggested she was fighting the urge to throw it against the wall. This Brent guy deliberately left you out of the meeting invitation, and then let you take the blame for missing it. Pretty much, I said. Guy's been gunning for my promotion for months. Guess he figured sabotage was easier than actually doing better work. The look on her face was the same one she used to get when kids at school would make fun of her worn-out clothes. Quiet fury mixed with determination to prove them wrong. That's not just unprofessional, she said. That's straight-up evil. Yeah, well, corporate politics aren't exactly known for bringing out the best in people, I said, but I could feel something warm spreading in my chest at the fact that she was getting angry on my behalf. It had been a long time since anyone had been in my corner like that. We sat there for a moment, letting the weight of all these revelations settle between us like dust after an explosion. The jukebox was playing something by Tom Petty, the kind of song that makes you feel nostalgic even if you can't remember what you're being nostalgic about. That's when she reached across the table and did something that stopped my heart for a second. She put her hand over mine, just like she used to do when we were kids and one of us was scared or sad or overwhelmed by the general unfairness of being young in an adult world. Riley, she said, and her voice was soft but steady, like she'd been thinking about this for a while. I have to ask you something, and I want you to be honest with me. Shoot, I said, though my heart was suddenly beating fast enough to power a small city. Are you seeing anyone right now? Because if you're not. She paused, and for just a second, I saw a flash of the uncertain girl I used to know, the one who wasn't sure if she deserved good things. Would you maybe want to try dating? You and me, I mean. See what happens. And just like that, the universe had gone from playing practical jokes to offering me everything I didn't even know I wanted. You know how people always talk about finding your missing piece, like you're some kind of human jigsaw puzzle wandering around incomplete until the right person comes along? Well, I used to think that was complete bullshit. One of those greeting card philosophies that sounds nice, but doesn't actually mean anything in real life. Turns out I was wrong, because dating Maribel felt exactly like that. Like I'd been walking around with a Maribel-shaped hole in my life for 15 years and just hadn't realized it until she filled it again. The first few weeks were surreal, like living in some alternate reality where good things actually happened to me instead of the usual parade of minor disasters and corporate humiliations. We'd meet for coffee before work, and she'd tell me stories about her rise through the ranks at Torwell. How she'd started as an intern making barely enough to cover ramen noodles and student loan payments, and clawed her way up through sheer determination and a talent for seeing through corporate BS that would make a polygraph examiner jealous. The secret, she told me one morning while stealing half my blueberry muffin, some habits die hard, is figuring out that 90% of business decisions are just grown-ups playing elaborate games of rock, paper, scissors, except they use PowerPoint presentations instead of hand gestures. She was different from the girl I remembered, but also exactly the same in all the ways that mattered. Still thoughtful, still kind to waitresses and baristas, and anyone else trying to make a living dealing with the public. Still had that way of listening that made you feel like whatever you were saying was the most important thing in the world, even if you were just complaining about how the office coffee machine had achieved sentience and was now actively plotting against the accounting department. But now she was also sharp as a tack and funny in ways that caught me off guard. She'd make these dry observations about corporate culture that were so spot on they'd make me snort coffee through my nose, which is both painful and attractive, let me tell you. Watching her navigate the business world was like watching a masterclass in professional competence. She never raised her voice, never lost her cool, but somehow always got exactly what she wanted through a combination of intelligence, preparation, and what I can only describe as polite ruthlessness. Meanwhile, back at Morrison Industrial Solutions, karma was finally coming around to collect on Brent's debt to the universe. Turns out, when you're dumb enough to leave a paper trail of your own incompetence, it's only a matter of time before someone notices. Talia Nguyen from HR, a woman who could find a needle in a haystack while blindfolded and probably enjoying it, called me into her office about 2 weeks after the Torwell incident. So, she said, pulling up emails on her computer screen like she was presenting evidence at a criminal trial. I've been doing some digging into this scheduling mix-up that almost cost us the Torwell contract. I sat there trying to look innocent while secretly wondering if this was some kind of trap, because in my experience, when HR wants to chat, it usually means someone's about to get fired, and that someone is usually me. Turns out, Talia continued, Brent sent the meeting notification to everyone on the team except you. Which is interesting, because your name was on the original distribution list, but somehow got deleted before the email went out. She turned her monitor around so I could see the email timestamp and recipient list, and there it was, digital proof that Brent had deliberately sabotaged me. It was like finding a smoking gun, except instead of solving a murder, we were solving the mystery of why I'd almost become unemployed. Moreover, Talia said, and I could tell she was enjoying this part, this isn't the first time there have been communication issues involving Brent and other team members. Funny how these technical difficulties only seem to affect people he considers competition. Long story short, Brent got demoted faster than a lead balloon, transferred to a position where his main responsibility was organizing office supply closets and contemplating his life choices. Justice served, corporate style. But the real plot twist came when Garvey called me into his office the following Monday. I walked in expecting another lecture about quarterly projections or the importance of synergistic paradigm shifts or whatever buzzword was trending that week. Instead, he offered me the promotion I'd been working toward for 2 years. You stayed quiet and professional during that whole mess, he said, which in Garvey speak was practically a presidential citation for valor. Didn't throw anyone under the bus, didn't make excuses, just focused on fixing the problem. That's leadership material. So there I was, suddenly sporting a fancier job title and a salary bump that meant I could finally afford name-brand cereal again. But the best part wasn't the money or the recognition. It was having Maribel to share it with. Our weekends became these perfect little adventures in rediscovering each other and our city. We'd hit up farmers markets and argue about which vendor had the best tomatoes, visit art galleries where we'd pretend to understand abstract paintings while making up ridiculous interpretations, and spend lazy Sunday afternoons at animal shelters, ostensibly just looking at cats, but really engaging in the kind of emotional torture that only pet adoption can provide. We could get one, she said one Sunday, holding a tiny orange kitten that looked suspiciously like a young Milo. My apartment allows pets. Are you trying to kill me with cuteness? I asked, watching the kitten attempt to attack her earring. Because it's working. Maybe, she said with that grin that made my heart do stupid things. Is it working? Everything was working. For the first time in years, maybe ever, all the pieces of my life seemed to be fitting together like they'd been designed that way all along. Work was good, my personal life was better than I'd dared to hope, and I was spending my days with someone who understood both where I'd come from and where I wanted to go. The universe, it seemed, had finally stopped playing practical jokes on me and decided to hand out happy endings instead. And I was ready to accept whatever came next. You know how some people say that when you know, you just know? Well, those people are absolutely right, and also completely unhelpful, because knowing and doing something about it are two entirely different beasts. I'd known I wanted to marry Maribel approximately 6 months into our relationship, right around the time she taught my neighbor's kid how to properly pet a stray cat, while simultaneously negotiating a better deal on my car insurance over the phone. Watching her multitask acts of kindness and practical life management was like witnessing a superhero discover their powers, except instead of flying or shooting lasers from her eyes, Her superpower was making everything around her better just by being there. But knowing you want to marry someone and actually working up the courage to ask them are about as similar as knowing how to swim and jumping off the high dive at the Olympics. The ring had been burning a hole in my sock drawer for 3 months while I tried to figure out the perfect moment, the perfect words, the perfect everything. Because if you're going to ask your childhood best friend turned love of your life to marry you, you better not screw it up with some half-baked romantic gesture that belongs in a bad movie. The opportunity finally presented itself on a crisp Saturday afternoon in early October, when the leaves were doing that thing where they turn every color in the Crayola box and make you believe that maybe the world isn't such a terrible place after all. We were at Mom's house for our monthly dinner tradition, something we'd started after Maribel and I had been dating for about a year, because Mom had basically adopted her all over again and would guilt-trip me into early grave if I didn't bring her around regularly. You know, Mom had said to me the week before, with that knowing look that mothers perfect sometime around their child's 5th birthday, the backyard looks particularly nice this time of year. Perfect for, oh, I don't know, important conversations. Subtle as a brick through a window, my mother. But she wasn't wrong. The hill behind Mom's house was where I'd spent countless hours as a kid, climbing trees and building forts and generally avoiding homework. It was also where Maribel and I used to sit sometimes during those golden afternoons when she'd come over after school, sharing snacks and dreams, and the kind of easy friendship that only exists when you're 10 years old and the world hasn't yet taught you to overthink everything. After dinner, I suggested we take a walk, trying to sound casual while my heart hammered against my ribs like it was trying to escape. Maribel, bless her, probably thought I was just being nostalgic, especially when I led her up the familiar path to the top of the hill where you could see the whole neighborhood spread out below like a patchwork quilt of suburban dreams and middle-class aspirations. That's when Milo made his grand entrance. Well, Milo II, technically, the orange and white kitten we'd finally adopted from the shelter after weeks of just looking. Mom had been cat-sitting while we were at work, and apparently he'd followed us outside because he had abandonment issues and possibly a sixth sense for dramatic moments. "There's my baby," Maribel cooed, scooping him up while he purred like a tiny motorboat. "Were you being good for Grandma Patterson?" Watching her with that kitten, seeing the way her whole face lit up with pure joy over something so simple, I knew I couldn't wait another second. The ring box felt like it weighed about 50 pounds in my pocket, and my carefully rehearsed speech evaporated like morning mist, leaving me with nothing but the truth and a hope that it would be enough. "Maribel," I said, and she must have heard something in my voice because she looked up from the kitten with those same expressive eyes that had thanked me for half a sandwich 20 years ago. "Yeah?" she said, and I could see her processing my expression, the way I was standing, the fact that my hands were shaking just enough to be noticeable. That's when I dropped to one knee, because apparently some traditions are too deeply ingrained to ignore, even when you're trying to be original. The ring box came out of my pocket like it had been waiting its whole existence for this moment, and suddenly everything else, the neighborhood below us, the sounds of traffic, even Milo's purring, faded into background noise. "Back then, I only gave you bread," I said, and my voice was steadier than I'd expected it to be. "Half a sandwich when you were hungry, and you looked at me like I'd given you the world. But now I want to give you everything. Really everything. My name, my future, my terrible jokes, and my complete inability to remember where I put my keys. I want to give you Sunday mornings and Tuesday nights, and every moment in between." I opened the ring box, revealing the diamond I'd picked out after visiting approximately 17 jewelry stores and questioning every life choice that had led me to understand so little about precious stones. "Maribel Vega," I said, "will you marry me?" For a moment that lasted approximately 17 years, she just stared at me. Then she started laughing, but not the kind of laughter that means you've just made a huge mistake, the kind that bubbles up from pure happiness and sounds like everything good in the world distilled into sound. "Yes," she said, and then she was crying too, which was confusing but also wonderful. "Yes, Riley, of course yes, you ridiculous man." The ring fit perfectly, which was either incredibly good luck or divine intervention, and when I stood up to kiss her, Milo decided to weave between our legs like he was blessing the union or possibly just trying to trip us both. 3 months later, we got married in Mom's backyard, right there on the same hill where I'd proposed. It was a small ceremony, just family and close friends, exactly the way we both wanted it. Mom cried through the entire thing, which made me cry, which made Maribel cry, which turned our wedding into one of those beautiful disasters that you remember forever because they're perfect in all their imperfect glory. Even Jasmine sent a message, which I had to admit showed more class than I'd given her credit for. You look happy. I was wrong. Congratulations. Short, sweet, and surprisingly mature for someone who'd cheated on me with a guy named Brad who probably thought literature was something you found in a gym. We didn't need big speeches or elaborate ceremonies. We had each other. We had Mom beaming from the front row. We had Milo attempting to destroy the flower arrangements. And we had the kind of love that had survived childhood separation and grown stronger for the distance. And that, as far as I was concerned, was more than enough to build a life on. You know how they say life comes full circle? Well, most of the time that's just something people put on inspirational posters next to pictures of sunsets and motivational quotes about believing in yourself. But sometimes, if you're really lucky, it actually happens in a way that makes you believe the universe might have a sense of humor and possibly even a heart. It was a Thursday afternoon in late spring, about 6 months after our wedding, when Maribel suggested we take a drive past our old elementary school. We'd been talking about starting a family. One of those conversations that married couples have where you're planning your future while simultaneously trying not to jinx it by talking about it too much. She'd mentioned wanting our kids to have better school experiences than we'd had, which got us both feeling nostalgic about our own educational adventures in the land of fluorescent lighting and mystery meat. Want to see if the place is still standing? She asked, and I could tell by the way she said it that this wasn't just idle curiosity. Maribel had that look she gets when she's got a plan brewing. The same expression she wore when she was about to reorganize my entire apartment or negotiate a business deal that would make grown men weep with envy. Jefferson Elementary looked exactly the same as it had 20 years ago, which was either comforting or deeply depressing, depending on how you felt about the general concept of institutional stagnation. The same red brick building, the same playground equipment that probably violated 17 different safety codes, the same chain-link fence that made the whole place look like a minimum security prison for very small criminals. Should we go in? I asked, half joking, because walking into your old elementary school as an adult feels like the kind of thing that should require a permission slip from someone. Actually, Maribel said, reaching into her purse with the kind of deliberate purpose that made my curiosity meter spike into the red zone. Yes, we should. That's when she pulled out an envelope that looked official enough to be important, but not scary enough to be a tax audit. Inside was a letter addressed to the principal, and when she handed it to me to read, I felt that same warm sensation in my chest that I'd gotten the first time she'd laughed in our living room all those years ago. It was a donation, a big one, enough to cover unpaid lunch fees for the entire school district for a whole year, with enough left over to probably upgrade the cafeteria equipment and maybe even hire a food service company that didn't consider beige to be its primary culinary aesthetic. The letter was written in Maribel's precise, professional handwriting, but the sentiment was pure heart. No child should ever be told they can't eat. Ever. At the bottom, in smaller print, it said the donation was being made in honor of Patricia Patterson, my mom, who had taught us both that sometimes the most important lessons happen around the kitchen table, not in the classroom. When did you do this? I asked, and my voice came out a little rougher than I'd intended because apparently I was having feelings about my wife being secretly amazing, which was becoming a regular occurrence. Last week, she said, looking slightly embarrassed, like she'd been caught doing something noble and didn't want to make a big deal about it. I've been thinking about it for months, ever since we got engaged. Your mom saved my life, Riley. Fed me, welcomed me, made me feel like I belonged somewhere. This is just paying it forward. The school secretary was confused but delighted when we walked in and Maribel explained why we were there. Within 10 minutes, we were sitting in the principal's office, voluntarily, for the first time in either of our educational careers, watching a woman named Mrs. Rodriguez read the letter with the kind of expression people get when they've just witnessed a miracle. This is incredible, she said, and I could see her already mentally calculating how many kids would benefit from Maribel's generosity. We have 43 students currently on the free lunch waiting list, and this will cover all of them plus. Plus every other kid who needs it, Maribel finished. That's the point. As we walked back through the hallways that had once seemed enormous, but now felt like dollhouse corridors designed for people half our current size, I kept thinking about 10-year-old us. The hungry girl and the boy who shared his sandwich, neither of us knowing that we were planting seeds for something that would grow into this. A love story, a life together, and now a way to make sure other kids wouldn't have to sit in cafeterias wondering if they'd eat that day. We ended up in the lunchroom, which still smelled like disinfectant and institutional cooking, still had the same tables where we'd first discovered that kindness could be as simple as breaking bread in half. But this time, we weren't hungry, scared kids trying to navigate a world that seemed determined to keep us on the outside. We were adults, married, successful, and standing hand in hand in the place where our story had really begun. Do you still have that notebook? I asked as we walked back to the car. The one you gave me before you moved? She smiled, that same smile that had made my 10-year-old heart skip a beat and still made my 30-something heart do embarrassing things. It's in my nightstand. Want to add a doodle? Only if it includes a cat, I said, because some traditions are worth maintaining. Deal, she said, and kissed me right there in the school parking lot, probably scandalizing any teachers who might have been watching from the windows. And that's how our story came full circle, not with dramatic gestures or grand pronouncements, but with the same quiet kindness that had started it all. Sometimes the best happy endings are really just new beginnings in disguise, and sometimes love is as simple as making sure no one goes hungry.